My name's Amber, and I've got a story to tell you. I was married for years to Jake. We had a son, Tommy, who'd finished college and was working some office job downtown. He'd moved out a while back, renting his own place. Jake and I both worked at Steinman Financials. I was the deputy chief accountant, and he was in the finance department. Before we got hitched, we signed a prenup. It said if we ever split, whoever's name was on the property kept it, and we'd split the cash down the middle. Seemed fair at the time. We bought an apartment first, put it in my name. Then we got a house, put that in Jake's. We each had our own car. I always did the shopping for furniture and stuff. Jake hated it, even online shopping. So I kept all the receipts, being an accountant and all. Never knew when they might come in handy. Lately, Jake had been obsessing over our retirement. He'd spend hours poring over financial news, muttering about inflation and the rising cost of living. "Have you seen gas prices lately?" he'd grumble over breakfast. "And don't even get me started on groceries. How are we supposed to retire comfortably at this rate?" I'd try to reassure him, but he was like a dog with a bone. He'd research get-rich-quick schemes, always looking for that magic bullet. One day, he came home excited about day trading. "Amber, I think I found our ticket," he said, waving his tablet at me. "Look at these stock charts. If we play it right, we could double our money in no time." I shook my head. "Jake, that's too risky. We can't gamble with our savings." He sulked for days after that, but I stood firm. We needed stability, not high-risk ventures. One evening, Jake suggested we take a walk. The air was crisp, and the streets were quiet. As we strolled, he started talking about retirement again. "You know, Amber," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "there's a way we could make a few $100,000 easy. Set ourselves up for a cushy retirement." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? How's that?" He leaned in closer. "We could siphon some money from the company accounts. I can set up the transfers and finance, make them look legit. You just need to push them through in accounting." I stopped dead in my tracks. "Are you serious right now?" "That's theft, Jake. We could go to jail." He held up his hands, laughing suddenly. "Whoa, calm down. I was just joking. Testing your honesty, you know?" I relaxed a bit, but something felt off. "That's not funny, Jake. Don't joke about stuff like that." Sorry, he said, still chuckling. "Come on, let's head back." We walked home in silence, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Something had changed, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Life went on as usual after that night, but something had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it, but Jake seemed different. More distant, maybe. I tried to brush it off as stress from work. One day, our chief accountant quit unexpectedly. The company wasted no time in hiring a replacement. Her name was Vivian, and she waltzed into our office like she owned the place. Young, beautiful, and oozing confidence, she made quite an entrance. "Listen up, everyone," she announced on her first day. "Things are going to change around here. I expect nothing but the best from my team." Her eyes lingered on me a bit too long, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Something told me she wasn't happy about having me as her deputy. I was right. Over the next few weeks, Vivian made my life hell. She'd criticize my work constantly, making me redo reports multiple times for the tiniest errors. A few days later, during a management meeting, I noticed a glaring error in Vivian's calculations. I hesitated, not wanting to embarrass her, but my sense of duty won out. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "I think there's a mistake in these numbers. The quarterly projections. They don't add up." The company director, Mr. Steinman, leaned forward. "Is this true, Vivian?" Vivian's face turned beet red. She snatched the report from me, scanned it quickly, then forced a smile. "It seems there was a small oversight. Thank you, Amber, for catching that." The words dripped with venom. As soon as the meeting ended, she cornered me in her office. "Listen here, you old hag," she snarled, all pretense of professionalism gone. "I don't care how long you've been here. I'm in charge now, and I'm going to make your life miserable until you quit." I stood my ground. "I won't quit. I've done nothing wrong." She laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "We'll see about that. You're on thin ice, Amber. One wrong move, and you're out." As I left her office, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I'd worked too hard to let some young upstart push me out. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Vivian seemed to be on a personal mission to make my life miserable. She'd pile work on my desk minutes before I was supposed to leave, criticize every little thing I did, and make snide comments in front of the whole team. I tried to keep my head down and do my job, but it was getting harder every day. Jake wasn't much help either. He'd come home late, barely talk during dinner, and spend most of his time glued to his phone. One particularly rough day, I decided to stay late to finish up some reports. The office was quiet, most people had gone home. As I was about to leave, I heard voices coming from Vivian's office. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to listen. "Everything's going according to plan," I heard Vivian say. "That old bag won't know what hit her." A man's voice responded, but it was too low for me to make out the words. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. Just then, the door started to open. I bolted, nearly dropping my purse in my haste to get to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a man leaving Vivian's office. I couldn't see his face, but something about his build seemed familiar. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Who was Vivian talking to? What were they planning? And why did that man seem familiar? The next morning, I was called into Mr. Steinman's office. My stomach dropped as I saw Vivian standing there, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Amber," Mr. Steinman began, his voice grave. "I'm afraid we have to let you go." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What? Why?" "Vivian has brought some concerns to my attention," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She feels you're not performing up to our standards." I tried to argue, to explain how Vivian had been treating me unfairly, how she could be harming the company. But Mr. Steinman wouldn't budge. "Vivian comes highly recommended," he said. "A good friend of mine vouched for her. I trust his judgment." As I stood there, shell-shocked, Mr. Steinman's expression softened slightly. "Look, Amber. I appreciate your years of service. I'll make sure you get the maximum possible bonus. It's usually reserved for upper management, but I think you've earned it." I nodded numbly, barely hearing his words. As I turned to leave, Vivian's voice stopped me. "Don't forget to clear out your desk," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want you to leave anything important behind." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the malice behind her perfect smile. In that moment, I knew this was personal. But why? What had I ever done to her? When I got home, the house was empty. I called Jake, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. As I sat on our couch, staring at the walls, I felt lost. My job had been such a big part of my identity. Who was I without it? The next few months were a whirlwind. At first, I tried to enjoy my unexpected vacation. I threw myself into home projects, finally tackling that renovation I'd been putting off for years. One evening, as I was putting the finishing touches on our newly renovated living room, Jake came home with a gleam in his eye. "Amber," he said, excitement clear in his voice, "I've got an idea. Let's buy a new house." I blinked at him, paintbrush still in hand. "What? We just finished renovating this one." He waved dismissively. "Yeah, but think about it. With all the work you've done, we could sell this place for a fortune. Add in a bit more cash, and we could get a real luxury home. There's one for sale just a few blocks over, it's got a pool and everything." I hesitated. "I don't know, Jake. We've put so much work into this place. Come on, Amber, he pressed. I've already got a buyer lined up for this house. All we need to do is sell your apartment, you know, the one we've been renting out. And we'll have more than enough. Something about his eagerness set off alarm bells in my head. But I pushed the feeling aside. This was Jake, my husband. If I couldn't trust him, who could I trust? Okay, I said finally. Let's do it. The next few weeks were a blur of real estate agents, paperwork, and packing. I sold my apartment, putting the money into our joint account as Jake suggested. It felt strange, letting go of a place that had been mine for so long, but Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. The day before we were set to move, Jake came home early. Hey, honey, he called out. I need you to do me a favor. Can you give the place a real deep clean? I'm bringing someone over tonight to see the house. I spent the day scrubbing and polishing, making sure every surface gleamed. By evening, I was exhausted but satisfied. The house looked better than it ever had. As I heard a car pull up outside, I smoothed down my hair and straightened my clothes. Time to make a good impression on our buyer. The front door opened, and I plastered on my best smile. But as Jake walked in, followed by his guest, my smile froze on my face. It was Vivian. She sauntered in, her eyes roaming over the house with a proprietary air. Then her gaze landed on me, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. Well, she drawled. Looks like the maid service has already been here. I stood there, stunned, as she turned to Jake. You were right, darling. It's perfect. Darling? I looked at Jake, praying for some kind of explanation. But the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. Amber, he said, his voice cold and unfamiliar. I want a divorce. The room spun around me as I tried to process Jake's words. Divorce? And with Vivian? What's going on? I managed to choke out. Jake's face was set in a hard line. It's simple, Amber. I love Vivian. We want to be together. Vivian draped herself over Jake, her eyes gleaming with triumph. That's right, honey. I'm not just taking your job. I'm taking your husband too. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted nightmare. How long? I whispered. Jake at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. A while, he admitted. But that's not important now. What's important is that we part ways, amicably. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Amicably? You've been cheating on me, and you want amicable? He held up his hands. Look, I'm trying to be fair here. We'll split all the money in the joint accounts 50-50, just like the prenup says. I'll keep the house, since it's in my name. Clean break. My mind was reeling, but something clicked into place. The apartment sale, the rush to move, it had all been part of their plan. You manipulated me, I said, my voice growing stronger. You made me sell my apartment so you could get your hands on more cash. Jake shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. It's just business, Amber. Nothing personal. I saw red. Nothing personal? This is my life you're destroying. Vivian laughed, a cold, cruel sound. Oh, honey. Your life was already over. You're just too pathetic to realize it. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Fine, I said, my voice steady. I'll go. But I'm taking what's mine. Jake looked relieved. Sure, whatever. Just be out by morning. I nodded, then turned and walked calmly to the phone. Jake and Vivian watched, puzzled, as I dialed. Hello, Speedy Movers? I need a team here first thing in the morning. Yes, it's a full house move. Jake's face darkened. What are you doing? I smiled, a cold, hard smile that felt foreign on my face. I'm taking what's mine, Jake. Every single thing I bought for this house. Hope you and your mistress enjoy your empty love nest. The look of shock on their faces was almost worth the pain of the past few hours. Almost. As I headed upstairs to pack my personal belongings, I heard them arguing in fierce whispers. Let them fight, I thought. I had work to do. I spent the night sorting through papers, gathering every receipt I'd saved over the years. By morning, I had a clear inventory of everything that legally belonged to me. When the movers arrived, Jake tried to stop them, yelling about the prenup. But I calmly showed them the receipts and the clause in our agreement stating that individually purchased items remained the property of the buyer. Item by item, the house was emptied. Furniture, appliances, even the food in the fridge, all loaded into the moving van. Jake and Vivian watched in horrified silence as their perfect plan crumbled around them. As the last box was loaded, I turned to face them one last time. Jake looked shell-shocked, while Vivian's face was contorted with rage. Enjoy your new life, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm sure it'll be everything you dreamed of. The next few days were a blur of activity. I rented a small storage unit for my belongings and checked into a modest hotel. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened and figure out my next move. On the second day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer, representing Jake. Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice cold and professional, I'm calling to inform you that your actions regarding the removal of property from your marital home were illegal. My client demands the immediate return of all items. I laughed, surprising even myself with how steady my voice was. I don't think so. Everything I took, I purchased. I have the receipts to prove it. The lawyer paused, clearly not expecting this response. Nevertheless, the prenuptial agreement. The prenup states that individually purchased items remain the property of the buyer, I interrupted. You're welcome to review it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have my own legal matters to attend to. I hung up, my heart pounding. I knew this was far from over, but I felt a small thrill of victory. For once, I was fighting back. That evening, I called my son, Tommy. I hadn't told him about the divorce yet, and my heart ached at the thought of breaking the news. Mom, he answered, his voice concerned. Is everything okay? I've been trying to reach Dad, but he's not answering. I took a deep breath. Tommy, there's something I need to tell you. Your father and I, we're getting a divorce. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, what? Why? What happened? I explained as best I could, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice, for Tommy's sake. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm so sorry, Mom, he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. What can I do? Do you need a place to stay? I smiled, grateful for his support. No, honey, I'm okay for now. But there is something you could do for me. I explained my plan, feeling a twinge of guilt for involving Tommy. But I needed someone I could trust completely, and who better than my own son? Tommy agreed without hesitation. I'll do whatever you need, Mom. Dad, he's made his choice. I'm on your side. As I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness for the family we once were, anger at Jake's betrayal, but also a fierce determination. I had been knocked down, but I wasn't out. Not by a long shot. I pulled out a notebook and began to write, outlining my plan. Jake and Vivian thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. I was going to take back everything they had stolen from me, my job, my dignity, and my future. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Tommy, true to his word, moved back into Jake's house, claiming he wanted to support his father during this difficult time. Jake, caught off guard by this unexpected show of filial loyalty, welcomed him with open arms. Little did Jake know that Tommy was my eyes and ears inside the house. Every night, we'd talk on the phone, and he'd fill me in on what he'd discovered. Mom, you won't believe this, Tommy whispered one night. I managed to get into Dad's computer. There are emails between him and Vivian, going back months. They'd been planning this for a long time. My heart clenched, but I pushed the pain aside. What else did you find? Tommy's voice dropped even lower. There are some weird financial documents. I don't understand most of it, but it looks shady. I felt a spark of hope. This could be the break I needed. Can you make copies? Already done, Tommy said. I'll drop them off at your hotel tomorrow. True to his word, Tommy delivered a USB drive filled with documents the next day. As I pored over the files, my accountant's brain kicked into high gear. The more I read, the more my suspicions grew. There were discrepancies in the company's financial reports, money moving between accounts that shouldn't exist. And at the center of it all were Jake and Vivian's names. I remembered Jake's joke about embezzling money from the company. It seemed it wasn't a joke after all. Armed with this information, I knew it was time to make my move. I called my lawyer, explaining what I had found. This is serious, Amber, he said, his voice grave. If what you're saying is true, we're looking at major fraud. But we need more concrete evidence. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I understand. What do you suggest? We need to get the company involved, he said. If we can prove that Jake and Vivian have been stealing from Steinman Financials, it could change everything in your divorce proceedings. The next day, I marched into Steinman Financials, my head held high. As I walked through the familiar corridors, I could feel the stares of my former colleagues. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, but I ignored them all. I knocked on Mr. Steinman's door, my heart pounding. Come in, his voice called out. As I stepped into his office, his eyes widened in surprise. Amber, what are you doing here? I took a deep breath. Mr. Steinman, I need to talk to you. It's about Jake and Vivian. And it's about your company. For the next hour, I laid out everything I had discovered. The suspicious transfers, the hidden accounts, the discrepancies in the reports. Mr. Steinman's face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Get me the head of security and our legal team. Now. He looked back at me, his expression a mix of anger and gratitude. Amber, I owe you an apology. And a thank you. If what you're saying is true, you may have saved this company from disaster. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity at Steinman Financials. Mr. Steinman, acting on the information I'd provided, ordered an urgent audit of the company's accounts. The results were shocking, even to me. The auditors confirmed what I'd suspected: money was indeed being siphoned from the company's accounts to unknown destinations. The total amount stolen was staggering, approximately $400,000. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about how long this must have been going on right under my nose. A large-scale investigation followed, involving not just the company's internal team, but also external forensic accountants and law enforcement. As the evidence mounted, there was no doubt left: Jake and Vivian were guilty of extensive fraud. I watched from the sidelines as their world came crashing down. Police officers arrived at the office one morning, leading both Jake and Vivian away in handcuffs. Their property and accounts were seized, and a criminal case was opened for economic crimes. Despite the satisfaction of seeing justice served, the aftermath was messy and painful. Because of the prenuptial agreement we'd signed years ago, I couldn't reclaim the money from the apartment I'd sold. Instead, those funds, along with our other joint accounts, were split equally between us. The house, being in Jake's name, remained his property. However, my lawyer fought hard, and we managed to secure some victories. I received financial compensation from Jake amounting to 50% of our house's value, plus lifelong alimony. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was something. But I wasn't done. I went after Vivian too, demanding compensation for the trauma and financial loss I'd suffered due to her actions. The court sided with me, ordering her to pay over $35,000 in damages. In the end, Jake and Vivian received suspended sentences for their fraud. All their property was confiscated, leaving them deep in debt. The court also barred them from holding any senior positions in the future. Their careers, like their reputations, were in tatters. As I left the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, but also hope. The past few months had been a nightmare, but I'd come through it stronger than ever. I'd uncovered a major fraud, reclaimed my reputation, and secured my financial future. With a substantial amount of money in my bank account, I decided it was time for a fresh start. After weeks of searching, I found the perfect place, a small house with a cozy garden on the outskirts of town. It was nothing like the lavish home I'd shared with Jake, but as I stood on the porch, looking out at the neat rows of flowers and vegetables, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I threw myself into renovating the house, making it truly mine. I painted the walls in warm, cheerful colors, installed bookshelves for my growing collection, and set up a small home office overlooking the garden. Tommy visited often, helping me with the heavier work and just keeping me company. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing I'd installed, sipping lemonade, he turned to me with a smile. "You know, Mom, I'm really proud of you," he said. "After everything that happened, look at you now. You're amazing." I felt my eyes well up with tears. "Thank you, honey. That means more to me than you know." As I settled into my new life, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Steinman. "Amber," he said, his voice warm. "I hope you're doing well. I have a proposition for you." It turned out that after the dust had settled from the fraud scandal, Steinman Financials was in need of a new chief accountant. And they wanted me. "Your work in uncovering the fraud was exemplary," Mr. Steinman said. "We need someone with your skills and integrity. Plus, there's a substantial bonus in it for you, as a thank you for saving the company from ruin." I was speechless. After a moment, I found my voice. "Mr. Steinman, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I'd be honored." My first day back at the office was surreal. As I walked through the doors, not as a disgraced former employee, but as the new chief accountant, I held my head high. My former colleagues greeted me with smiles and congratulations. Mr. Steinman met me in the lobby, a broad smile on his face. To my surprise, he pulled me into a hug. "Welcome back, Amber," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're lucky to have you." As I settled into my new role, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. I was doing work I loved, surrounded by people who respected me. The financial bonus was generous, allowing me to pay off my new house and set aside a nest egg for the future. In the evenings, I'd return to my little house, tend to my garden, and relax on the porch swing. Sometimes Tommy would join me, other times I'd enjoy the solitude. I started taking classes at the local community college, art, literature, even a cooking course. For the first time in years, I was focusing on my own growth and happiness.